Hello and welcome to the Inner Sense channel. I'm so pleased today to welcome back Caroline Williams to the Inner Sense channel. Caroline is a science writer and journalist who often writes for The New Scientist, and today we're talking about the research and the information about interoception in her book, which is also called Inner Sense, the same as this channel. Caroline last came on this channel a couple of years ago when we were talking about her book Move, which also included some research on interoception. So I'm really excited to talk more about her work, and please remember to subscribe to the Inner Sense channel for more information about body awareness and tips for how you can improve your well-being. So Caroline, welcome back.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back. It's like time has flown. Time
has flown. And so we discussed your book Move last time, which was another fantastic book that I thoroughly enjoyed and gained lots from. What kind of led you to write a whole volume on interoception?
Well, I think as you rightly spotted in Move, which was all about why and how different ways of moving your body affects how you think and feel, the sort of why behind that, why does movement have changed the way you think and feel, the answer is interoception, because what you're doing is changing the signals, the body brain aspect of interoception, the bottom up signals, either sort of in the moment by doing some short sharp movement, or in the longer term by maybe increasing strength and changing the body's sense of capability and what it can achieve in the world. And so that got me thinking, okay, well, I'd heard a lot about interoception in neuroscience in general, and I thought, well, let's dig into this and see what's out there. And it's like cleaning your house. When you start looking, there's loads, and it suddenly exploded into this huge subject. And it just struck me that this is a subject, as you know, that's not only really important for our understanding of the mind, but also it's something that not many people know about, and it is a genuinely new idea that people can apply in their own lives right now. And those kind of ideas don't come along very often in science and science journalism, no matter what, people report on breakthroughs every other day. Most of them aren't breakthroughs, they're just small, iterations. But yeah, this is genuinely a new and important idea that very few people know about. So that's why I too am an interoception bore now. So it's good to chat to one of my own.
Yes, yeah, I agree that it is. I mean, as you're sort of arguing, it's a fundamental kind of way in which living organisms work to sense their internal environment. But as you say, it's something which, for some reason, in research, it hasn't been covered thoroughly, or at least not in the way that it is now through the field of interoception. So your book, it clearly wasn't a dry desk job. It sounds like you traveled lots from all the people you met, and you got to do some test some of the experiments, swallowing vibrating pills and spending time in sensory deprivation tanks. How did kind of immersing yourself in all of these different experiments and meeting these people change the way that you noticed your own bodily signals, if at all? Maybe it did.
Yeah, well, it did actually, because as soon as I started reading about the research, a lot of the studies so far have been done on heartbeat detection, and I started thinking, well, I can't really detect my heart very well. Is there something wrong with me? Is this, is that strange? And so I started going to labs. The first one I went to was Hugo Critchley's lab in Sussex. So he's one of the sort of pioneers of interoception research. And I did the heartbeat detection, and I was pretty average. A lot of people can't feel their heartbeat at rest. And so it kind of helped me to get a sense of what I was talking about and ways in which the researchers are trying to boost those signals and tweak those signals to see what happens to the brain, to conscious perception of reality and how you're feeling, how you're thinking. So I think there's no better way really than to go and try this stuff out. And scientists I found are just brilliant. Sahib Khalsa in particular, he was at the Laurie Institute in Tulsa at the time. Now he's in UCLA. He's been amazing the whole time. He invited me over. They have research flotation tanks there. That's where I did the vibrating pill. They did some breathing interoception experiments on me, which I think I'd like to tell you about a bit more detail in a minute. But yeah, they sort of ran me through the whole thing. And some of it was really unexpected, because one of the things about interoception is what you think you're feeling and what that means, sometimes just as your eyes and ears can deceive you, so can your internal signals. And it's kind of really interesting. The only way to really get a handle on that is to do it, really. So yeah, I love hanging out with scientists, and they seem to love people who come and volunteer for their experiments. So even though they're quite apologetic sometimes, it's putting me through the protocols.
The restricted breathing, which hopefully we'll talk about in a little while. But yeah, and you've just touched on there some of the kind of that kind of anticipatory and predictive nature of how we experience the world, and how we kind of try and match our what we're sensing with what we think we're going to experience. So yes, let's cover that in a little while. But first of all, do you have any interoceptive practices yourself that you do? I know you're keen in exercise and staying healthy generally.
Yeah, well, it's a work in progress, because I identified through the self-research that there are some weaknesses that explain some of my experiences. So it's a multi-pronged attack, really. So one of the things I'm doing is so there's been training studies with heartbeat detection, which has shown that improving people's actual precision at feeling their own heartbeat, if you ask them to also say how sensitive they think they are to what they can feel, if those two measures don't match up, if the belief and the actual measure doesn't match up, that's where problems can come in, things like anxiety, because the brain is taking this information and using it to process things unconsciously. And if what your brain is processing unconsciously and what you're consciously aware of don't match, then that's when the confusion can come in. And so trying to increase that, so the training studies that have been done, which have increased precision and then decreased anxiety, basically involved getting your heart rate up for a bit so you can definitely feel it, and then letting it settle down and trying to stay tuned into that. And over time, you become more sensitive at a lower level, which means that you can intervene before things, in a stressful situation, you notice and can regulate before things get out of control. So what I do is, when I'm walking my dog, I walk up the hill, get to the top, can really feel my heart beating, and then just sit for a while and just feel my heart as it goes back to normal. It only takes, a minute or so. And I'm trying to do that to try and improve my my ability. Also, flotation tanks, they're not necessarily that available. The nearest to me is London, which is a 45-minute train journey away. But whenever I can, if I have a day off, I'll go and do that, because that's a way to experience your internal body signals in a very calm environment. And the idea with that is that it teaches you to sense your body as a safe place, so you feel it not only when things are going awry, but also as a safe baseline. So those are the things I'm trying to do to increase my ability to tune in. But when I've done the there's a Maya questionnaire, you've probably come across it, the multi-dimensional assessment interoceptive awareness, MAIA, and it's you can do it online, and it kind of gives you it can give you a readout. But one of the things that came out of my doing that was that I'm actually likely to listen to my body, but my ability to self-regulate and to not worry about any dodgy signals or worrying signals is really bad. So for me, that's where the movement comes in, because I sort of have to externalize the regulation. So whether that's I go for a walk, whether I do some yoga, whether I do a somatic meditation to calm things down. So it's almost like if my natural ability to regulate isn't there, then I need to do something to change those signals. So that's sort of where I am at the moment. It's very much a work in progress, I would say.
So it sounds like over time you've kind of without deliberately doing it, you've been drawn to things like exercise and yoga that maybe they create an interoceptive experience and practice and help you self-regulate.
Exactly.
I like what you've said about that walking up the hill, then stopping, or going to a flotation tank, because the sort of elements of that are reminiscent of these practices that have been around for centuries or for even longer. Meditation, mindfulness, where we deliberately find a quiet place to turn our attention, sometimes turn our attention outwards and focus on something, but also some of the Buddhist body scan kind of techniques or heart focus compassion. It kind of makes sense from self-regulation perspective and reflecting on, is what I'm feeling an accurate reaction or a useful reaction to what's going on in the outside world?
Yeah, because the skill that we really want, I sort of describe it as a emotional version of potty training. So, we've all learned to kind of sense interoceptively when we need to go to the toilet, and then you sense that, you go and deal with that situation, you come back and you get on with whatever you were doing, you get on with your day. You don't spend the rest of the day thinking, oh, I went to the toilet, I'm such a bad person. You don't, you sense it, you deal with it, you move on. And that's really what I think for self-regulation is the sort of the holy grail, really. You want to be able to feel it, accurately interpret it, deal with whatever it is, or find some way to regulate. If you can't change the situation, find a way to regulate, and then move on.
Yeah.
I can't say I've mastered it yet, but
I think maybe it's a lifetime practice for all of us.
Well, I think that is, but I think with the meditation side of things, meditation's been around for a while, and a lot of it's focused on, okay, just notice what your thoughts are and let them float by, and it's very much sort of cognitive in the head, whereas there aren't so many of them. But I have found a couple of somatic based meditations that are about finding areas of discomfort in your body and just being with it and seeing, is there a message there, and then moving on to an area that feels where you feel ease or no discomfort, and sort of sensing that. So that seems to me, I mean, for some people, I guess you maybe shouldn't do that without a bit of guidance or support. But
yes,
I find it quite difficult. Yeah, some things can come up, but if you're not, some people have shut off their interoceptive signals for good reason because of trauma histories, and you might need a bit of help to unravel that with someone. But those therapies are starting to become available. So
yes, yeah. And just before we started recording, I mentioned that I went to a inaugural lecture from Professor Jane Aspel earlier this week, who studies interoception. And I think one of the pieces of research she showed was, I think it might have been people with fibromyalgia. Some of them are extra sensitive to certain types of body signals. So my sort of experience is that with my clients, that no one person is the same. Some of them really struggle to notice anything in their body at all, and others are really kind of like overly kind of sensitive to certain types of certain signals. So it might be their tightness in their chest, or their heart rate, or feeling hot or cold, and for them, drawing attention to that can be really stressful. So as you said, it needs to be done with a little bit of caution, but I love that idea, the general principle of potty training, and we don't need to worry about going to the loo. It's actually a normal part of every day, and it's sort of just using it in a way that helps our lives run smoothly.
Yeah, and you're right, you don't want to in certain things like chronic pain, sensitization is a thing. So some of those signals, the brain and body connection has been set up in such a way that that we become more sensitive to certain signals, so such as pain. And also people who have been diagnosed with a cardiac arrhythmia that they didn't know about suddenly become hyper aware of the heart, and it can be debilitating because they don't want to move or do anything because it feels like something bad's going to happen because they can feel their heart. So there's definitely a balance to be struck. You don't want to be telling everyone. Sometimes in well-being circles there's a lot of talk about you just need to listen to your body, and well, yes you do, but you don't need to listen to that above all else, because sometimes it might be you might have learned the wrong association and be stuck in a loop with that.
Yeah, totally agree. And I'd like to talk about the kind of words we use to describe our inner experience. And early on in your book, you sort of contrasted the Western approach to talking about our emotional experience. We often use mind and head focused ways of expressing our emotional experiences, and you can contrast this with some of the vocabulary from the Hadza community, where they explain their emotional experiences more through sensations in their body. Why do you think as a culture we've kind of lost or gained different ways of describing our emotions? And would it be more helpful if we all used body focused ways to talk about how we feel?
Yeah, I mean, that was an interesting study. That was Lisa Feldman Barrett was involved in that study, and she was looking at expression of emotion with the Hadza, who are a hunter-gatherer population, compared to an American comparison group. And the Hadza people, when they encountered something really scary or stressful, described it as, my heart was pumping out of my chest. I felt hot in that moment. Whereas the Americans would kind of explain it in terms of, oh, I felt humiliated. I thought people would think I was stupid, or I was, all these kinds of things. Where it comes from, I don't know. I mean, René Descartes gets the blame, doesn't he, for kind of, I think, therefore I am, that the mind is something ethereal and immeasurable, and the body is something meaty and real. I think also the way medicine was set up in Western medicine, it was done by dissecting cadavers and not unreasonably going, okay, this organ does this and this bit does this, and if we fix that and we remove that, and whereas I think sort of some other cultures, Eastern ones in particular, have always seen the body as a whole and been interested in the flow of energy and blood and all these kinds of things. So I think that Western approach has clearly been amazing, because look at what's happened to lifespan, and we've managed to fix a lot of stuff. But it does mean that if you want to study the mind, you become a neuroscientist, and it's very brain centric, or has been for a very long time. If you want to study the heart, you study the heart. And it's only recently that those kind of connections have started to be made. Although arguably there was, in sort of the 1800s, there were a couple of attempts to say, there's the James Lange theory of emotion, that changes happen in the body and then they're interpreted by the brain, so we don't feel scared, and then the heart pounds, we feel scared because the heart pounds. So there's been a couple of attempts, and then Antonio Damasio came along in the 90s and said that the body was required for consciousness and emotion and all these kinds of things, and it's sort of come back since then, since neuroscience has moved on to say, okay, well, it's not the case that the brain sits up here doing the clever stuff and then the body just gives inputs which the brain interprets and then gives instructions. It's the brain is making predictions of what it thinks is happening, because it doesn't know anything, it's sitting in a box, comparing to the inputs, and then the predictive processing allows that to work, because it makes it fast enough that you can adapt to what's happening in the body. So this kind of, it's like neuroscience has moved on. There's also a lot of problems that are clearly mind, body, brain, body, and these separating them hasn't helped in any way, shape or form. So this is all coming together to a place where, okay, we need to consider that the mind is built on what's happening in the body.
Built on, yeah. So we kind of dismantled everything, taken all the pieces apart, and then realized actually we need to look at them together again and see it a little bit more holistically.
Yes, absolutely. And also but then it obviously gets very complicated then, because you've got, it's not that we have eyes, we have visual cortex, that's been all mapped out. But with the body, you've got however many sensory neurons, a lot of which we don't even know what they're sensing, finding out new stuff all the time. And that's all kind of, it's going to the insula, which is the interoceptive cortex, but it's all sort of been put together with everything else from the outside world as well. So it's kind of, it's a more complicated system. So we're trying to unravel something that's even more complicated than we thought it was. But
that came out really clearly in your book. Even though we've learned a lot more in the recent years, there's so much more still to understand, and so the kind of the cause and effect, or the chicken and egg kind of nature of these feedback loops and discussion between different systems in the body and the brain and the body, still not completely clear how that works. And I want to sort of talk about some of the examples you gave in your book. One of them that stood out to me was the research from Mark Blumberg on twitches that happen during sleep, and how that suggests that maybe the body kind of trains the brain in some way. So there's a kind of, rather than thinking, as you said, that the brain is the master kind of intelligent controller, actually the intelligence maybe is a little bit more distributed, and they're all in conversation with one another.
Yeah, I mean, this is where language gets tricky, because no matter how you describe it, it sounds like the body and brain are separate, whereas they're not. And there's no good word that I've come across that kind of gets rid of, gets that as like a whole animal situation. So it's not like one and the other. It's kind of a constant back and forth. So yeah, that research is really interesting because it's these twitches that happen in our sleep when the body is usually paralyzed in our REM sleep when we're dreaming. And studies with mice have shown that when these twitches happen, the twitch happens first and the brain responds afterwards. And so he's suggesting that maybe what that's doing is that while we're asleep, the sort of the whole body brain system is updating, it's running maintenance basically on these connections to see whether they're updated, if anything needs to be changed, which is kind of interesting because it's always been thought like, the brain is there and it's just these are sort of leaking out instructions from the brain. But actually what it is, it's in information gathering so that in the morning, the predictions that you're working with are up to date and ready to go. I mean, this is all kind of, supposition so far. This is, just from sort of one experiment, but it's kind of a really interesting idea that turns it on its head, what we usually would assume.
Yeah. And it links to the idea of, multiple brains, having a sort of brain in your gut. And I like the idea of having a software update every night whilst I'm asleep.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a reboot.
Well, I
Literally.
see with my clients, some of my I do manual therapy part-time, and there's some techniques we can use that a little bit kind of like very blunt versions of acupuncture. So you just put pressure maybe with your thumb on a little trigger point or a knot in the muscle, or some fascia techniques where you hold. And for some people, when you're working on them, you see these little twitches start to happen in the muscles, and for less than 10% of the people I work with, you get quite dramatic reactions as well, like the whole arm will start kind of gyrating, and they liken it to kind of like a yawn where they could suppress it if they want to, but they feel it has a life of its own. Which and I think it sort of maybe comes back to that safe environment. But as I'm listening to you and your work and others about this kind of distributed sort of intelligence and networks, I wonder if those local kind of networks have got a kind of autonomy of their own. And yes, they might be speaking through the spinal cord or central pattern generators or whatever we want to call them. This updating is a kind of ongoing process.
Yeah, and then maybe afterwards, what the kind of background chatter that comes in, at a sort of unconscious level might be different from tension to sort of not tense. It's interesting because one of the things that we don't know, and I spoke to Helen Longovan, I don't know if I'm saying her name right, but she's at the NIH, very senior, and I was talking to her about some of the stuff we don't know. And I said, do we know the signal, what signal it is for muscular tension and how that is interpreted as as stress, and we just don't know that yet. So there's a lot to learn there about how manual therapies and stuff actually change the bottom-up signals. But clearly they do in some way, because otherwise they wouldn't make people feel better.
Yeah, you explained in the book that there's new receptors being discovered all the time. I can't remember the name of the one you said is like a flat propeller, and it kind of detects.
Oh, the piezos. The
piezos. That was it.
Yes. So they won Ardem Patapushan a Nobel Prize a few years ago for the discovery of those, and they're everywhere. And he's found them recently. So when I spoke to him, he said, "Oh yeah, we started looking in fat tissue, because we thought, well, that's one of the places that we're not going to find them." And they did. They found them in fat. So our fat tissue is able to sense pressure or stretch. What it's doing and what that has to do with metabolism potentially, we don't exactly know yet. But our bodies are sensing things all the time that we're not aware of. Some of them we will never be aware of, and it doesn't matter. Like, you don't need to have conscious insight into everything your body's doing, as long as it's doing it. Getting on with it.
And we'll come back to fat in a moment, because you talked about opsins and light sensing ability of fat cells, which I want to talk about. But that's just reminding me of a point you made just then about not needing to sense everything or know how it all works. And you could argue that our emotional experience, our felt sense, is the combined computation of all of those senses to help us realize what's relevant in any moment. Have you come across Mark Solms at all and his work?
Yes, I know the name. I haven't spoken to him directly. Yeah.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
love his
Yeah.
like the hidden spring, his idea that to be conscious of anything, it comes from body
Yes.
based signal, and that's what
Yes.
it's that error signal is what
Exactly.
our
So
emotional experience is.
yeah, I mean, and that's the point of having interoceptive signals. We only need to know about them because what it's telling us is something is not right on the inside that we need to take action to change. Whether that's fear, you need to get out of the way. Whether it's you're hungry, you need to eat. You're tired and you're ill and you need to rest. Tired and you need to rest. Whatever those things that we feel emotionally, that's sort of a language saying, okay, something needs to happen here. The problem happens when the signals go awry and we feel the feeling, but we're not quite sure what to do with it.
Yes, not what to do with it or what the cause might be. There's an old cartoon from one of Sarah Garfinkel's pieces of work that made it to a national newspaper, and it was a kind of a joke that I think it was that trading. You talked about the traders and their heartbeat detection. It was the cartoon was based on that, and it was a trader who placed a bet and it had gone wrong, and it said that his gut feeling turned out to be indigestion. So is it kind of some amazing insight that I'm feeling, or is it just indigestion because I've eaten?
And sometimes sometimes it leads you wrong. I've had experiences before where I've taken an instant dislike to somebody, and it hasn't been right at all. I mean, sometimes it is right. Sometimes you're like, you were right all along, and sometimes no, they just reminded you of somebody that you didn't get on with or did you wrong in the past, and you're actually bringing that baggage to the new relationship. And so I think the idea of always trusting your gut is not necessarily what we want to be telling people to do, but at least factor it in. But what Lisa Feldman Barrett talks about curiosity. So be aware of these sensations, but be open to the possibility that it's not telling you what you think it's telling you. You might be eating not because of hunger but because of fatigue. You might be looking for comfort or whatever.
The hunger is real, but the cause of the hunger might be something that we didn't expect.
Because with the stomach sensations, the sort of need for food has sort of been co-opted for the need for social contact and support and comfort. And so comfort eating is comfort eating for a reason, because those gut feelings are sort of they're saying the same thing. So if you're eating because you're lonely, I mean that's kind of worth at least knowing that maybe that's something. And then you can still eat the food if you want to, but at least you're doing it from a place of knowledge, and then you can take away the shame of thinking, oh, I didn't need that chocolate mousse or whatever. You can do it from, I just felt like I needed some comfort and that made me feel better, and that's fine because I'm a human being.
Sometimes that's fine.
Sometimes it's fine.
And you just returning to the work on fat cells and Richard Lang's discovery about subcutaneous fat having light sensors in them, and that these may also influence our circadian rhythm and metabolism and possibly even hunger.
Yeah, so this is one of those weird kind of who knew moments. I mean, obviously it's very early discovery. It's not something we should be basing lifestyle advice off. Not saying everyone should be running outside naked at first dawn or anything like that. But it is interesting because who knew that that the fat can sense wavelengths of light, and so what's it doing with that information? Well, what they know from the experiments with mice, that if you block that pathway, the mice aren't able to regulate their fat stores. If they are low on food, it's more difficult to tuck into the reserves they've got. So when I spoke to Richard Lang, he's, obviously caveat, it's all very early, but he said, I'd be very surprised if it didn't have something to do with metabolic ill health, because we spend all our time indoors wearing clothes, and people who live in the Northern Hemisphere aren't getting, much light for much of the year. So it's an interesting one to kind of, as a, wow, who knew that was going on? And it's possible that it's relevant. I mean, there's probably bigger things going on with our metabolism than just light sensing fat, but it might be something that's that turns out to be important. Who knows?
Another kind of very sensitive way that we sense food is through the cells in the lining of our gut. And you touched upon a couple of times neuropod cells and how they can sense all kinds of nutrients and sort of feed into our nervous system and maybe our immune system. So how does that relate to our kind of gut feelings, would you say?
Well, there's a lot going on in the neuropod cells, it turns out. They're kind of, it seems to be quite a complicated bit of computation that they're not doing it. It's sort of along with the vagus nerve pathways and all that kind of thing. But everything from keeping a track of certain nutrients. So there's a calorie count from sugar that affects our appetite for sugar, and a calorie count for fat that affects our appetite for fat. They are able to take information from the microbes and use that. So it all kind of comes with, it all affects what we crave. So these neuropods working together with the microbes in our gut and updating the brain at lightning speed via the vagus nerve. There's all kinds of stuff going on with dopamine signaling. And so, yeah, I mean, it's huge. There's probably a whole book to be written about that. But yeah, it was a massive surprise to me that all this is going on. And it's all quite complicated as well, because it's not that you have one neuropod that says, oh, I sense this. They seem to take all the information and then somehow turn that into a language that the nerve can read, a neurotransmitter code, and then that's then being interpreted. It's all completely mind-blowing. I mean, in terms of what we do with this information right in the here and now, it's a bit like the advice with microbiome. It's just like, well, what we know is a diverse diet with lots of fiber in it is going to keep them happy, and then if the microbes are happy, they're not having to tuck into the stomach lining and cause inflammation and all those kinds of things. So when you kind of like, it's fascinating, like emerging bit of science. But when you boil it down to what do I do about this information in my own life, the advice is as it always was, really, just kind of eat food, not too much, mostly plants. But it's fascinating what's being discovered there all the time. And so there's been things being discovered about the calorie counters in the brain, in the hypothalamus. I think I'm right in saying that. If we overeat one particular type of nutrient, if we overeat sugar, then those calorie counters, they sort of start to lose count and they become less accurate. And so we might end up craving something that we don't need anymore. And then over time, it seems from experiments done so far, then that once you correct the diet, those cravings might still be there. So that sort of helps to understand why, okay, you can diet and you can change your diet and everything, but it can be hard to keep the good habits going because the body-brain conversation hasn't quite caught up with that change. So it's whether that can be then changed back to a healthy baseline. I think that's what everyone's hoping can happen.
Yeah, his belief updating, and it's just thinking about those neuropods and the calorie counting in the brain, the hypothalamus. You mentioned Lisa Feldman Barrett earlier, and I really like her idea of body budgeting. And as you're saying this, I'm imagining all these little kind of bookkeepers and accountants throughout the body trying to keep tally of everything. But if they get overwhelmed, then they just can't keep count, or the reports are a little bit wrong, a little bit off, and their forecasts therefore go off.
Yeah, and the things with having things like artificial sweeteners. So our glucose sensors on the tongue can be quite, sweetness sensors can be fooled by artificial sweeteners, but the ones in the gut seemingly can't be. So that kind of like what you're craving, what the gut's had, and what you think you want, it all gets very complicated because what you think you've had isn't what your body thinks it needs. And yeah, it's no wonder we're all a bit messed up when it comes to food.
You covered some of the success of the GLP-1 drugs. So again, that's a way that I guess this interventions that are trying to hack into all this intelligent communication and help people predict how much to eat and when to stop eating in a healthier way, either consciously or unconsciously. I liked, I don't know if you, I think this was in your book, you said that some people who take those drugs, they can sense that something's changed, but they can't put their finger exactly on what it is. And I found
Yes.
that a fascinating kind of blurry line between being aware of a feeling but not able to describe it.
Yes, exactly that. And so that was one of the people that I spoke to for the book, Colin, who was on them for a few months when we spoke. Yeah, and he said he found it hard to sleep the first night because it was just something had changed, but he wasn't sure what it was. I spoke to somebody else actually recently who's not in the book, who has been taking these medications, and he said, what I thought was quite fascinating, that he realized, having taken these drugs, that when people said, "I'm full, I don't want to eat anymore," he never really kind of, it's not that he didn't believe them, but he said it's something he couldn't relate to because he's never felt full, and it would only stop eating because it was polite to. You finished a meal, you had to go back to work and do something else. But it kind of gave him the sensation of, oh right, this is what it feels like to have had enough to eat. And so I think what for me, because I think these injections have become weaponized, you know, if people lose weight, they're like, people point and say, ha ha ha, you've been taking those, that's cheating. And if they don't lose weight, they say, well, why haven't you taken them? It's, you know, there is a treatment, you're clearly not doing it right. But what the more important, bigger issue to me is that rather than seeing being overweight or having issues with food and eating, it takes a moral sort of finger wavy out of it, because if it's something that's amiss with the body brain connections and the treatments can sort of help correct that, then it's not like, oh well, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, why can't you just stop when you're full? Maybe they're wired differently. You know, why can't, you know, it's a bit like saying, why can't you see to the end of the garden? Well, because the lenses in my eyes are a funny shape. Why can't you stop eating? Because I can't feel when I'm full. So I think it's sort of, in theory, to me, the way we should be taking this information and this new technology and new medicine is to say, okay, well, this makes it a real thing. We can stop shaming people now and kind of address the issue.
Take a bit more of a compassionate view and realize that we've still got a lot to learn about how that body budgeting process works, and even how again, I've got sort of clients who some of them, they exercise more than anyone else. You know, they're at the top of the leaderboard of exercise, how many hours a week they put in for exercise, and they can really do fasting and be really strict with all these different diet plans, but for some reason, as soon as they take in some food, their body wants to store that away as fat underneath their skin or around their organs, and it just seems that their body is calibrated that way to do that, whereas other people can not really do any exercise. They eat whatever they want, and their body will just process the food completely differently.
Absolutely.
We don't quite understand why that is yet.
No, and also the food environment is an important part of it. So you can shame people for being overweight, but if also, you know, you have a situation where people are working all hours and they still don't have money or time to be making home cooked, or the knowledge to make home cooked, you know, nutritious meals every night, you can't then shame them and say, oh well, look, they're doing it wrong, because the environment and the food that's available at the right price is behind the problem, and it may be messing with these internal signals that should be keeping things in checks and balances, but for their reasons that are not anyone's fault, well, not their fault at least, that they're being sort of messed up by the modern world.
Even the power of brands and advertising and labeling to kind of create desire. And I think there was some experiments with your former colleague in his book Expectation Effect, talked about the way that products are labeled, or the weight of a product can influence how full a person feels, or their belief in how nutritious food is going to be. So we're at the whim of all these things that we might not be deliberately, we're not acting on them deliberately. They're kind of unconsciously influencing us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there's so many things I could ask about from your book, and I encourage anyone listening to this to get a copy. Hypermobility and OCD and PTSD, these sort of chronic conditions that can cause people's lives to be really challenging. You've touched on that there may be possibly for people with these sort of in these diagnostic categories that there's a mismatch between bodily sensations and their expectations. One of the labs you went to, which were studying people who have these conditions, this is where you did the breathing exercise, where you had to listen to sounds and sort of it kind of trained you to expect whether you were going to get a difficult in-breath or not. Can you share a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, this was one of the rare examples where doing the experiment wasn't as fun as I thought it was going to be, because I sort of had to have my head in a rest with a snorkel in my mouth that was attached to an oxygen canister, and sort of sit in front of a screen and do as I was told on the screen. So what happened was some of the in-breaths would be difficult to breathe. So they assured me that it was perfectly safe and I would be getting enough oxygen throughout, but it doesn't feel very nice because intake of air, you know, these lung sensations, like the heart sensations, the brain, if it's not expecting it, never takes a change or a problem as just information. It's kind of loaded with kind of quick, do something about this. So it didn't feel very nice. It was kind of like didn't enjoy it at all. So we went through a period of training where they paired a particular tone with an easy breath or a hard breath. So I think it was a high-pitched tone with a hard breath and then a lower one with an easy breath. And so we did a period of learning that. And then we did the experiment where I took a breath in, and then they would ask me, did you expect, based on the tone, did you expect an easy or difficult breath? And did you feel it difficult to breathe? So, but without telling me, they'd sort of mixed it up. So that the tone and the breath was no longer what I was expecting sometimes. But what was amazing was about a third of the time, if I heard a high-pitched tone, I felt a hard breath, a difficult breath, even if it wasn't one. And sometimes if I heard a low tone and they gave me a hard breath, I didn't notice the hard breath. And you would think that if it was just bottom-up information, my brain would be going, that's a hard breath, quick, do something about it. But no, because my expectation was there, I interpreted that as, oh no, that's fine. Oh no, this one's a worry. And yeah, it was a complete shock to me because it should have been easy to tell the difference. And what this shows, and the experiment at the time was just getting going, so you know there was no one to compare me to, but people in similar experiments who are less able to flexibly shift their expectations based on incoming interoceptive information are more likely to suffer with things like anxiety and PTSD and addictions and all kinds of sort of body brain issues, because what's not happening is the updating. So the brain is sticking to the hard won lessons of the past rather than going, oh no, I'm safe. So in things like PTSD, for example, you know, you hear a noise, someone will hear a noise and panic because it takes them back to being in a war zone. Even though the current information is I'm safe, I'm in a suburban street, that was just somebody dropping something or a car backfiring or whatever. So the problem comes with the failure to update that the situation has changed, and that doesn't mean what you think it means. I wasn't very good at it. So whether this feeds into my sort of anxious temperament, probably, because my brain was particularly stubborn. Yeah. So yeah,
you learned something about yourself there as well.
I did. Yeah. What I think I'm feeling, sometimes I'm not feeling it. So I mean that comes back to the curiosity things. Like, okay, if you think you feel something, maybe just take a step back and go, is that really what's happening?
I think you talked about another person in the book who described their anxiety as whoosh moments or something like that, where they,
yes,
it was now that they know that they have this kind of reaction, and they call it a whoosh moment. They don't panic so much. They can kind of say,
yes,
just my body's doing this thing, but I don't need to make it a more uncomfortable experience by worrying about it so much. Just let it ride out.
Yeah, well, interesting. That person actually contacted me this week and took issue with the fact that I called whoosh attack, I called it anxiety. And she said, actually, I don't think of anxiety because it can be any intense emotional reaction. It can be you know, excitement, it can be joy, it can be, it's a moment of overwhelm, which I thought was quite interesting. I need to reply to her and sort of ask her more and update this for the paperback version, because you think, oh, this heart racing whoosh moment would be like, oh, panic, but it's not necessarily. So, but there is some evidence that people with sort of poor interoception, that plays into sort of issues, it can sometimes be difficulty in telling apart what the very similar physical sensations mean. You know, so for example, the feeling of being excited and the feeling of being anxious, they're quite similar physically. So can you tell apart those two things and discriminate them and then regulate accordingly? If it's one reaction and one way of dealing with it, then that makes it a lot more difficult to kind of navigate life reacting in the appropriate way. So that's where I think the sort of precision and the nuance comes in.
A little bit like a wine connoisseur. I'm
yes,
definitely not a wine connoisseur. They all taste the same to me, but some people can really tell those subtle differences. I think that's for arousal. Yeah, excitement and anxiety can feel very similar. I think the bottom end of the scale with relaxation and tiredness as well. Often, you know, after a holiday when you should be relaxed, people come back, say, I feel exhausted. You know, maybe it's that calm state or that kind of less aroused state could be either tiredness or calm.
Yeah, like lethargy as well. I mean, I find this difficult, but my toxic coping strategy, if I'm overwhelmed, is almost like I don't do fight or flight. I do hide. I do sort of and it seems to be like a one size fits all reaction to stress, overwhelm, excitement, everything. It's like I just need to lie on the sofa for a bit, and it's not very helpful at all. And also, you know, sort of feeling lethargic. Sometimes it's difficult to know, do I need to go and like walk around the block for a bit, or do I need to have a nap? It's difficult to tell the difference. I wish I could have an easy way to say, okay, this is how you tell the difference. I think the general advice that I've seen that makes sense to me is like, if you feel exhausted and you take a rest and you don't feel any better, then maybe it's fatigue and not tiredness. Maybe you need to do something else. Maybe there's another way to rest. So some of the research on rest suggests that rest doesn't have to be still and low energy. Rest can be going out to see a friend. Rest can be running up a hill. You know, there's different ways of regulating that feeling of that isn't just stopping. My husband's at the other end. His reaction to being absolutely exhausted is to get up at the crack of dawn and go and dive into some cold water. And I'm like, I'm sure maybe sleeping in would be better, but you know, that's not how he copes with it. So yeah, people are different, but yeah, I really wish I could say one weird trick to tell the difference, but unfortunately our bodies are complicated.
I'm a fan of siestas anyway, where possible. The little afternoon lay down is a nice way.
Yes, so. Absolutely. It's creative work.
Yes. So I'm aware that we're coming up to an hour since we first logged on. What would you say are the most sort of exciting frontiers for interoception research? You touched on a few kind of studies on pre-sentiment and so on. Where do you think body-mind health will be moving? Or you've said you think it's we shouldn't call it body-mind. There is no distinction. But where do you think this area of research is moving in the next few years?
I think what's going to be exciting is to see some of the new interventions coming through, because you've got things like at Tulsa where I went and did some flotation. They've been using flotation for addiction, for eating disorders, and the eating disorders I think is really interesting because they're very, anorexia in particular is incredibly hard to treat. It's the disorder with the highest death rate, and so using flotation seems to be quite a good way of getting people to be in tune with their bodies from the inside. So, at the moment, I think one treatment, I'm not an expert in the treatment, but I've read that, it's still used, mirror confrontation, where people are told to look at themselves and say, look, you can see there, you can see what shape you are. And that does seem to be helpful, but it doesn't last for very long. Whereas what they've done with flotation is by introducing people to their feeling of their body from the inside, it sort of helps with body image more, because you're really getting to know yourself from within as a safe space. So I think that's a really interesting avenue where interoceptive signals can be used. And I think also the training is a really interesting way, because so Sarah Garfinkel's group, they're working on an app that can be taken out of the lab, and anyone can learn to do this, tune in better to the heart. And they're going to try, they're trying that in trials now to see if it works just as well without being in a lab with the scientist telling you what to do. So, and with pain as well, you know, the nociplastic pain has only just been added to the sort of official list of types of pain. And that's the type of pain that isn't to do with an injury. It isn't to do with nerve damage. It's to do with the body-brain connection. And so it needs a body-brain intervention to kind of treat that. And so that sort of thing is not very well known yet, but these kind of interventions are starting to come through. And I think we're going to start seeing more and more. But meanwhile, you've got a lot of scientists sort of doing the basic work to try and figure out what exactly is going on, because it's all so new. It's all so new. But there are some things that come through. Sometimes it can be treatments that we have already, like exposure therapy. It can be supercharged. Though this is Hugo Critchley's work. They did people with spider arachnophobia, and if you present pictures of spiders to people on a heart as the heart is beating, that's been shown that you're more likely to process emotional fear-based information as the heart's beating. So if you do that in the context of exposure therapy, people seem to get through the fear and get over it quicker.
Wow.
So I mean, that's a really, so if you anything you can do to make that presumably quite a distressing process happen faster and be more effective would be great. So yeah, there's huge amounts going on, which I think is really, really exciting.
You've been so generous with us and given me and other people some really simple things to try. Even just, you know, walking up the top of a hill and noticing your heartbeat and pausing and just observing it for a little while is something that can help. So thanks for joining us again. Where can people find out more about your work?
Well, thank you for having me again. I'll have to write another book along the same lines and come back in a year or so, 2, 3 probably. Where can people find me? So I have a website, it's carolinewilliams.net. And of the socials, I'm most active on Instagram, so which is carolinewilliams_science. Yes, I'm slightly less reliable on the other socials, although I am there. If people want to find me, do.
I'll add those to the notes below this video. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely to see you back.
And soon.
Yes, take care.